This is the first, I think, of a series of ADA celebrations, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act. We here at Access Living thought it would be a lot of fun to take a look back at some of our achievements with regard to public transportation. All of us on this panel have the lived experiences of helping actually create the accessible transportation that exists today. We're going to start off talking about where we've been.
Visually.
How's our panel doing?
We're good.
Everybody position?
Phones off and everything.
I'm just going to introduce our panel briefly and tell you a little bit about the program. To my left, I am Judy Panko-Reese. I am the moderator for today. I use PACE ADA services. I use CTA ADA services. I also use Metra ADA services. And to my left is Renee Luna. And to his left is Mike Gervin, and to his left is Kate Yanius, our esteemed attorney and warrior on these cases. I don't know how many of you use public transportation that live with disabilities, but those of us on the panel often have the experiences where we get on a bus or a train and somebody turns to us and says, well, isn't it nice what the CTA or PACE or Metra has done for you people? And we all each one of us is taken aghast and we say, done for us? When you look around and you look at the curb cuts and you look at the lifts on the trains and the buses, and you even are aware of the ADA committees for each of the RTA, the PACE, CTA, and Metra, none of this existed in the 80s. None of this existed before the Americans with Disabilities Act. And one of the things we want to do today is to share with you where we've been, what life was like before the ADA, and also to help you understand how our local grassroots organizing is what really helped change the playing field for all of the public transportation, not only here in Chicago, but took a big step toward helping shape a lot of the transportation provisions that were enacted in the American with Disabilities Act. Every one of the panel members here today is somebody that I met through transportation. Renee is going to talk about this a little bit more, but for those of you who don't know, at the time in the 1980s when we were just starting to organize around transportation, it was one of the main and first group grassroots efforts that the disability community in Chicago really took up. And therefore, it turned out to be kind of a gateway for many of us, like myself, who was relatively newly disabled at the time, into embracing disability pride, disability identity, and basically thinking of myself as a taxpayer who was entitled to all of the benefits that taxpayers enjoy. It was through transportation that I realized that I was entitled to use the same services that everybody else did. So we're going to start off with a little montage, a video montage that's going to help us remember and revisit what it was like in the 80s when those of us on this panel were all fighting for transportation before we could access any public transportation.
ADAPT's struggles over the last few years have focused on the inaccessibility of the mainline bus system. We have tried through the various means, the official route of negotiation, but since that hasn't worked, we've taken to the streets.
Access! Now!
Right now, as we're talking, people are getting arrested for trying to ride buses. People who are climbing on board and paying their fare are being arrested for trespassing, creating a public disturbance and things like that, which is ridiculous if you think about it in a logical way. But of course, it gets all thrown out of logic. And the point is to throw everything out of the regular logic so that you can show up some of the inconsistencies and some of the lies and prejudice built into the way the system is working.
Americans Disabled for Accessible Public Transportation placed one of its members on the Archer bus, number 62, and Kent Jones refused to get off.
30 years ago this day, in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks desegregated the bus system down there. We're going to stop the segregation that we've got here in Chicago.
You know, rest assured that CTA has said we have the right to ride the bus if we can get on it, so we're going to get on that bus.
Now, when we get 4 or 5 people on, what we're going to do is each of you will get off at another corner. Like, say, Aaron, Mike, Lisa, and Dan get on, as an example. Aaron, you get off at one corner, take your time getting off. Mike, you get off at the next corner, take your time getting off, etc., etc. That should keep, the buses like to get in and out of the mall in 5 minutes. That should keep them there for at least a half hour if you do that. And people will take your chairs up, you know, we'll take their footrests off so that we bring up one footrest at a time, etc., and try to take it slow. Now, if you get on, and these cops say they're not going to hassle us, but if you get on and like a driver says, officer, throw these people off, you got to decide how far you want to take that. I would recommend that you get off, and then we'll just go to another bus, and then we'll just keep doing that for a couple hours so that the little men with the walkie-talkies at the end of the mall get messages that, uh-oh, if we send a bus into the mall, it may be in there for an hour and a half, okay?
Part of the Commonwealth, but it's very, very poor, and yet their buses have lifts. So there's no excuse. What? Most of their buses have lifts. And also in some small towns, like in my hometown, see, I'm originally from Maine, and that state is literally at the bottom. It's really has the poorest, lowest per capita income out of all the 50 states. And their buses in some of their cities, like where I come from in Lewiston, I have lifts. So there's no excuse for this. I mean, you know, lack of money, it's ridiculous.
What happened is that the police have told us that if we kept getting on the buses, that they would have to arrest us. Now, just like Rosa Parks got arrested for getting on a bus for no reason, we have not broken any laws. The CTA's policy says that we can get on the bus as long as we don't have CTA personnel for assistance. So we're asking you all to go home now. But remember that we'll be back. You did a good job. People understand that without lifts on the buses, this is going to happen time and time again.
Paratransit is also known as dial-a-ride or door-to-door service. You have to call in 8 hours in advance, although if you did call in 8 hours in advance, you wouldn't get a ride. You have to call in at least 24 hours in advance to get a ride. The act of scheduling a ride is it's degrading. Somebody once said, it's like having a delay on the ignition of your car, where you have to go out 24 hours in advance and turn the key, and then 24 hours later the engine starts.
Before we begin also, I wanted to say that we're really hoping this will be a conversation with all of you here in the room. The panel members are going to be sharing our experiences, and they will really be guideposts for talking points later on. But our main thrust here is to just give you a taste of what those of us on the panel here live through in order to get some of the ADA services that we have today, and then to embrace conversation with each of you in the room. So Renee Luna is going to begin by sharing his experiences, what his life was like getting around without accessible public transit, and then talk a little bit about the larger social cultural context that transportation plays for people with disabilities.
Okay, good morning.
Wait here. Wait a minute. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me okay? A little bit closer. Okay. All right, good morning. Good morning. I wanted to talk about what life was like before the ADA was passed and before we could celebrate this 25-year anniversary. Of course, now we all celebrate the fact that we have the trains, some of which have the scrolling marquees. We have the tactile warnings on some of the platforms, almost all the platforms, I think. We have the lifts on the buses, but it wasn't always like this. I remember I was injured back in 1970s, late 70s, and I started going to school, out of college, and my vocational rehabilitation counselor at the time set me up with door-to-door service. It was not run by the CTA. It was a private system. And that bus would come in, or that van would come and pick me up every day to take me to and from school. So I was limited. I only did that. I didn't cross the streets anywhere. I was going to DePaul at the time, and I was among the first to be going there with a disability. So I couldn't even get into all of the buildings. I couldn't get around freely. You know, it was life, just I had no spontaneity. I had to plan everything. I had to, in advance, tell people where I wanted to go the next day, as Drew said in the video. So freedom didn't mean a whole lot. Equality didn't mean a whole lot. I was studying political theory at the time, and these concepts were like, yeah, they're very important, but what do they mean for people with disabilities? So I remember that in the early 80s or middle 80s, the CTA began to run a door-to-door service. I think they first had one of these big street buses that they had put a lift on. And so I would have to schedule 24 hours in advance, and this big bus would be rolling down a residential street in Chicago. You can imagine what that would look like, having a big bus on a residential street. And I'd get picked up, and I'd go to and from work, and life was pretty normal, right, at the time. But then I heard that there were people who were protesting, people who wanted to have access to the mainline transportation. And ironically, it was because of these segregated buses that I met some of the activists, like Mike, like Kent Jones, and Judy, and some of the others. We said, yeah, we have a right to get on the bus. And that opened my eyes. It enlightened me. Everything that I was reading about freedom and independence and equality and social justice finally crystallized for me. I realized that, yes, I should have equal rights. I pay my taxes. I'm a citizen. I should have equal access to public transportation. So this was very empowering for me. At school, I began to ask, why can't I get into that building when I was going to DePaul? Why aren't you accessible? Why can't I cross the street? All of these things were very important at the time. And I recall the arguments against the buses. Some of them were that the CTA claimed that the non-disabled community wouldn't accept having people with disabilities on the buses. That it would just take too long. People would be inconvenienced. They said it would be too costly, that it would cost too much to put a lift on a bus. They said that it wasn't feasible. It just wouldn't work. And all of these things turned out to be untrue. As a matter of fact, I think we're saving them money by having lifts on buses, because not everyone has to depend on the door-to-door service. We have options, and that was important. We always said we want options. We want multimodal transportation for those who cannot use mainline buses. And it's also turned out to be not true that the non-disabled people won't accept disabled people on a bus. To the contrary, as soon as they hear the elevator, the lift being deployed, they start moving. The bus driver, most of the time, doesn't have to say anything. It's automatic. And certainly is very feasible. Now we have the modern ramps. I remember when they first came out with those old lifts, those elevators that would always break down. But now we have the ramp that if it doesn't work on a given day for whatever reason, the driver can get up and fold the ramp out. So all of the arguments CTA used really weren't valid. But for us in the disability community, I think it taught us some things, at least it taught me. One is that I'm equal. And it's very difficult sometimes for people to see themselves as equal. I think non-disabled people sometimes look down at people with disabilities and say, you're less than, you're, as Drew said, you're not valued as much. We don't have much to offer the society. Well, that's not true because people are out working and active and participating and contributing all of our talents and all of our skills. And we're out enjoying life and participating. That's community engaged, and that's very important. These hierarchies that existed at the time were being somewhat narrowed, at least leveled to some degree. The community empowerment that occurred, the mobilization of the community that occurred was very important. Disabled people became empowered, became active. We fought for our rights. We struggled together, collectively. We took collective action, and that was very important. And then the socialization impact was also important because we began to interact with other people. Non-disabled people began to see us as equals, and we had conversations. We had dialogue. Some of my favorite experiences are on the bus, is interacting with people and talking about whatever's happening, especially during an election season when we're talking politics. Oh, you support that candidate? No, I support the other one. That's very important. That type of social interaction is very important. And being able to get on the bus with my friends without disabilities, with my family, all of that really helps all of our social institutions. And I think that paved the way for the Americans with Disabilities Act and many of the rights that we have today. Of course, we still have to work to continue to enforce the law, and not only the section on transportation, but all the other areas, employment, economic issues. But all these things kind of paved the way, much the same way it did for other civil rights movements.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Renee. We'll be following up with your comments now. Our next speaker is Mike Irvin. Many of you know him. Mike, I saw Chris Matthews, your sister. I saw Chris Matthews in some of the videos here.
Mike was there too?
Mike, we were in the video. Renee, were you in there?
Your voice was.
I actually met your sister Chris on the bus, and that's actually how I got involved with Access Living. Was
okay.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that later. But so that's how I met.
From MSNBC is going.
Okay, so no, that was his. Okay, so Mike, if Kate, could you assist?
I have no idea how to turn this on.
All right, is Gare?
It's on.
All right.
Okay.
How's this? Okay, everybody?
So Mike's Mike's just going to talk about what life was like for him and Chris before any of our organization. Then he's going to give us a brief history of how we've evolved.
All right. How's this, everybody? All the way in the back. Got me? All right. If you don't, let me know. Yeah, hi, my name is Mike, and I'll tell you how I got here this morning. I live over on Harrison and Dearborn. So I went over to my closest red line stop, which is Jackson, and hopped on the train, rolled right in, came up to Chicago, rolled right off, came down here, and here I am. 30 years ago, believe it or not, that was a distant dream. We sat there and we just dreamed all night about, wow, we'll never be able to do that, even though everybody else in the neighborhood could. And that was, I graduated from college in 1978, and I came back to the southwest side of Chicago, and I did not drive. I never have driven. My mother was always had a van with a lift on it, and she drove me a lot, and various friends would, but I never really got around myself. This was as Renee said during what I referred to as the Medicar era, which is, what if you wanted to make that same ride 30 years ago from Harrison and Dearborn to here, which is only about 3 miles? Well, you would have had to have called the Medicar, and they would have said, why are you going there? And you would have said, well, if there's anything other than a doctor, you're not going. And if it was a doctor, it was about $100 one way, and it was what time they said to pick you up and blah, blah, blah. So how would you have done that in 1978? Well, you didn't, unless you had your own car, or unless you could push your chair or hitchhike or whatever. You were just on your own, pal. Then in 1981 or so, not because they were being nice about it, but because of new federal regulations, the CTA was required to do, I think it was a minimum of 1 or 2% of their budget, 3%.
It was
Supposed to be 3% of their budget to provide transportation for disabled folks. And of course, 3% was the minimum, and we all know that CTA, at least at that time, and maybe so today, I don't know, would do the absolute minimum. If you told them they had to do 3%, they would do 2.9%. So they spent 3% on these buses that Renee talked about. And how, if you wanted to make that ride from Harrison to Dearborn to here today, how would you do it then? Well, I would have had to have gotten up at 5 o'clock in the morning yesterday and started making a phone call. And it would have been like trying to call a radio station during a giveaway, getting a busy signal for about a half hour, and finally getting through, and then say, hello, I'd like to go to LaSalle and Chicago. I'd like to be there at 9 o'clock. And they'd say, well, we can pick you up at 6, or we can pick you up at noon. And you can either be there, you can either not go at all, or you could get there 2 hours early. So they'd say, okay, pick me up at 6, and then they'd pick you up at 7. And then to get here by 7:30, you'd say, well, first we got to go down by Comiskey Park and pick up 3 guys and take them 3 different places, and you might get here by 10 o'clock if they picked you up by 6. That's how it was during the dial-a-ride days. Now, I was a young guy, and I wanted to get around by myself, and I didn't really like that. I thought, well, what the hell is this? Why am I getting up a day early and asking permission and all this stuff? 2 things happened around that time that were really great, early 80s. One, Kate here to my left, and others were pursuing a lawsuit called Jones versus the CTA, and I'm sure Kate will tell you more about that. But Kent Jones, who was the man you saw on the bus talking about Rosa Parks and taking over a bus, was a very, very, very important figure at the time. He's the one who hooked up with Kate about starting a Jones lawsuit. Kent also took a trip to Denver in 1983 for the first organizational meeting of ADAPT, ADAPT, a national group that started in Denver. And their agenda was to have lifts on all buses from here on out. No other buses would be purchased without lifts on them, and no major renovations of train stations or anything else would be done without it being accessible. Kent comes back to Chicago around the Thanksgiving of '83, and it was like Marco Polo had gone to some strange, wonderful land and come back and told us all stories about where people ride buses, and they don't have to call a day in advance. And we're like, you're lying. No, really, it's just like that in Denver. And at the time, Chicago had absolutely no accessible buses. We were the only major city in the country that had no accessible buses. So I remember thinking, hearing Kent talk about that, and feeling a sense of combined joy and almost shame, because the joy was, wow, there's a solution to this. There's a way out of this. And the shame was that I lived in this city all these years and seen thousands and thousands of buses go right past me And it never once occurred to me that I had a right to ride that bus until Kent told me that. And I thought, wow, what an idiot. You never thought of this before. But, well, I got over it, and we formed Chicago Adapt, and we started doing our first actions in 1984, simultaneously to the lawsuit. We were hopeful for the lawsuit, and we were confident that it would prevail, but we didn't want to take our chances. Well, we weren't always confident it would prevail, but we were hopeful. And we didn't want to take our chances because courts can be fickle, and we thought, well, we're going to do protests along with this and try to draw attention to the lawsuit and hope they work together. I'll tell you real briefly about our first protest, or one of our first protests. We went to the Chicago Transit Authority, and the head of the CTA, his name was Michael Cardilli, and he was like central casting. If you were going to cast a real bizarre comedy about a bureaucrat, you would try to get a guy who looked just like Michael Cardilli, because he was tall and he had the Italian suits. He even had a pinky ring, and at the time you could smoke cigars in public, and he would sit in CTA board meetings and smoke cigars. And so he was the guy that was the head of the CTA board, because in order to get lifts on buses, we had to get 4 members of the CTA board to vote yes. So that was the target, to beat them up until we got 4 to vote yes. We went to a meeting, and we all wore name tags that said, "My name is Cardilli," and we brought cigars along, and every move he made, we started making the same move. And after a while, he realized that he was being mocked, and he couldn't really continue. And so later on, we started making noise with noisemakers and such, and they disrupted the meeting. One of the members had brought along nameplates that had our names on them, because the CTA board would sit around at a table with their nameplates, and we formed the People's CTA board. After they left, we took over the meeting, and we, in front of all the press, it was all for theater, but in front of all the press, we pounded the gavel, and we passed a resolution to put lifts on all the buses, and it got into the newspapers the next day. They tried to hold the meeting in another room. Fortunately, we found out in time, and one of our members shoved her chair in the door, and they couldn't close the door. And eventually, all that led to a resolution in the 1980s and more access to the CTA. But it's important to mention that it wasn't just a wheelchair issue. We were approaching it from that angle, but there was also issues for blind people and deaf people, such as calling out stops, drivers coming to a stop and not saying where they were, and somebody who's blind not knowing where they were, and drivers for some reason being obstinate about doing it, and also deaf people hearing things that were being announced. If there were announcements made on speakers or things like that, they would get left out too. So the ultimate settlements we came up with did deal with that too. But so now you can make the ride like I did. 30 years ago, you couldn't have made the ride at all. 25 years ago, you would have had to go through a major hassle. Today, can't quite do it as easy as everybody else, because everybody else would get on at Harrison, and I can't because it's not yet accessible. But at least it's almost equal to where everybody else is. And that's the context of where we've come over the last 35 years or so. Is that good?
Thank you, Mike. Now, our next speaker is known to all of us, Kate Yanius. She's our warrior. And Kate, if you could start off sharing how you got involved with disability rights and some of the highlights and some of the strategies you had to use and the brick walls we ran into when we were working with the transit agencies who were unwilling partners.
Well, hello, everyone. I see a lot. Can everybody hear me? I have a very soft voice, so somebody kind of wave something if you can't hear me. I have been involved with the issues regarding people with disabilities since 1978. Judy calls us the institutional
Wisdom.
Wisdom. That means we're old.
We are.
We're institutionally wise.
But we're smart.
Institutionally wise, Mike tells me. But in 1978, I worked with a committee to develop the Illinois Human Rights Act, and I insisted they include people with disabilities in that act because I had had a young woman come to me the year before who had one arm, otherwise no disability, just one arm, and she wanted to work in a men's store. And she was told, oh, you would offend our customers, so you cannot work in a men's store. And she came to me, obviously very angry, and I was very angry, and I said, I'm sorry, I have nothing I can do for you. Absolutely nothing. There were no laws. So that was before any, there wasn't any federal funding, so 504 didn't give her anything. So she was stuck without a right. And that seemed to me wrong. So I put people with disabilities, or I had them put this committee, people with disabilities, into the Illinois Human Rights Act. And then it sat, and no one came to me saying, sue on my behalf. So I called the Rehab Institute, and I said, why isn't anybody suing? And the person there said, because we don't know about it. I said, well, who do I talk to? And I met Susan Nussbaum, who at the end of an hour meeting said, you will never be unbusy again, because I'm going to take this back to Access Living, and you will have person after person coming to your door. And indeed, I did. One of the first was Chris Matthews, Mike's sister. And we did housing cases, and we did employment cases, and we did small individual cases, which was a good start. But I kept seeing Chris was late to meetings or couldn't get to meetings. And I said, what's the deal? Well, I can't get on the bus, Kate. Duh. Didn't even think about it. And we started talking. And I found out at that time, the entire city of Chicago, there were 400 paratransit rides a day provided. That's 200 round trips for 50,000 people, which is just simply not enough. There were Medicars and social service agencies, but they didn't do things like get you to your job, get you to a bar late at night, do those kinds of things. And then I met Kent Jones, and boy, he was a force, as we all know. Why aren't you doing anything for me, Kate? Why haven't you filed yet? Why haven't you done this? Call me up. He literally, 2 hours after my son was born, he called me in the hospital about something, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm a little tired. And he said, well, I figured you wouldn't be doing anything else, so we can talk. And so we talked for half an hour until the nurse came in and said, what are you doing? You're supposed to be sleeping. So you heard where we were. 400 paratransit rides a day. This cockamamie system where you had to call the day before was nonsensical. Federal court was a no-go. Federal court at the time, for the 504 cases, there had been several, one in New York, one someplace else, I can't remember. They had not been successful at getting lifts on the bus, getting scrolling marquees, any of those kinds of things. So I said, aha, remember, we have this Illinois Human Rights Act that has never had a major case, ever. We're going to do it. And with ADAPT, Susan Nussbaum, Tom Schwarls, who had the best impact the day he came. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Tom Schwarls, who knows Tom Schwarls? Anybody? Yeah, what a great guy. He was paralyzed from the neck down, and he used a sip and puff, as I recall, chair. And the day in the hearing, he is a witness, so he goes to the witness stand. We're all seated, which is unusual in a court, but that's the way we did it for that trial. And the judge is looking down at her papers, doesn't look up, and says, will you raise your right hand so you can be sworn? And without missing a beat, he said, Your Honor, I've been trying to do that for 25 years. It just isn't working. She looked up, horrified. And that was the start where she, at her memorial service, unfortunately, she died after this hearing. One of her staff members said, when that happened, and she started listening to the stories, she said, oh my God, now I get it. And before the hearing, she had said to one of her staffers, I don't know what these people want. They're not going to want to get on the bus.
People are these people.
So we had a 10-week hearing. The CTA said, oh no, they won't want to get on. It's too expensive. It's this, it's that, it's the other. And my favorite thing was, they said that the Act only covers those people who can utilize and benefit from a bus without lift assistance, like a blind person, who are legally handicapped. Remember, we use the words handicapped in the Act and at that time. But since the disabled are not physically able to get on the bus themselves, they are not handicapped, and therefore not subject to protection under the Act. The Human Rights Commission rightfully said, that's nonsense. We must read a reasonable accommodation provision into this Act. And that, if we'd gotten nothing else out of this, that would have been a major step forward for people with disabilities. What we established in the 1984, which was actually, the hearing was 1986? Yeah, 86. The opinion didn't come out until 88. Took a while. It was a 10-week hearing. What we established in this case, that bus transportation is a public accommodation under the Illinois Human Rights Act. The Illinois Human Rights Act implied a requirement that public accommodations must make reasonable accommodations for people, changes in facilities or services, so they do not bar people from getting on the buses. And most importantly, paratransit alone does not provide sufficient bus transportation to the citizens of Chicago. Now, this is interesting in and of itself because before the hearing, they provided 400 round trips a day. Just before the hearing, they upped it to 5,000 round trips a day, and it was still found not to be sufficient. So we got increased paratransit. It wasn't part of the opinion, but it was part of their ploy to win the case, but they didn't. An intricate consent decree. Remember that this is a time when there weren't any buses with lifts in Chicago. Very few places. I mean, Denver had them, Seattle had them. Portland, Maine, the only case with the Human Rights Commission kind of case with 5 buses had them. That was our precedent for this entire lawsuit, that one case. So we had an intricate consent decree negotiated by the parties to determine latent demand and whether it would work and blah, blah, blah. And every bus thereafter had to have a lift on it. And the Committee of People with Disabilities who would report to the board and ask questions of the board. This was the first step. You'll hear from what I'm saying, and I hope I don't go on too long, that this is an interplay between the demonstrations that pushed us, the lawsuit that got us there, and the legislative changes. You had to have all 3, I think, in order to get where we are today. So after Jones won, we cleverly named the suit against Metra Jones 2. I don't know who came up with that idea, but it's been confusing to people ever since. I will not take credit. It was also filed in 1984. But the Illinois Human Rights Commission came to the lawyers and the parties and said, we can't do another major case like this at the same time. We don't have people. And the lawyers are looking at one another. It was me and 2 law firms that provided services, and we were all saying, we can't do 2 10-week trials in 1 year. You know, it's not humanly possible. So we deferred that until after the CTA case was done. Went against Metra, had a lot of negotiations, and in the meantime, bless its heart, the ADA was passed. We, in 1992, we had been developing the people who were, and that was that lawsuit was filed on behalf of Kent Jones, Michael Irvin, Kathleen Waker, Lois Henneman, Michael Landwehr, James Wallace, Chris Matthews, and Sharon Lamp.
Yep.
Michael Landwehr is another critical person in all of this. Michael and I had been working on another case, and one day he called me and said, Kate, I'm in jail. I said, what'd you do? He said, I went on the Metro train, as I've been doing forever, and I refused to get off when they said I couldn't come on it anymore. And I said, what do you mean? He had been crawling up the stairs and pulling his wheelchair behind him for a year or more to get to work. And sometimes the train operators had actually helped him. That violated the Metro rules. Somebody reported him, and he was taken physically off the train and arrested. I was so angry. And Mike said, I don't know how I'm going to get home. He lived in Crystal Lake or someplace way out. And I thought, well, I can give him a ride. I have kids at home. We'll figure this out. But I thought, I'm just angry. And I called Mike Royko, and I told him what was going on.
You gotta tell everybody who Mike Royko is.
Does anybody not know who Mike Royko? Mike Royko was a columnist who just loved to take on businesses or government when they were stupid. And this was really stupid. So Mike Royko's staff called Mike Landor. I managed to call the attorney for the Metro, and I said, you really don't want to do this, have him in jail or not able to get home. And he said, I'll give him cab fare out of my pocket. Tell him that. So Mike got home. The next morning in the Sun-Times, there was a column that just made the Metro look incredibly stupid. There was a picture of Mike, how he wanted to get to work. That's all he wanted to do. So he was a great guy and somebody who should get a lot of credit. But on the Metro, we had spent a lot of time developing information about trains, how they could work. Because Metro, of course, and it's, RTA said, oh, it can't work, the same thing they'd said in the CTA. And I'd brought all this information, people from all over the country, connections I got from Mike and Renee, and we were all trying to get this information together. And one day I got, in 1989 maybe, I got a call from Steny Hoyer's office. You may know Steny Hoyer. He was a congressman who was one of the lead congressional pushers for the ADA, especially in transportation. And their staff member said, we heard that you're doing this case against Metro. Metro is the lead opponent to commuter rail lines in the ADA. They're saying it can't be done. Same thing they'd been saying to us. Do you have any data? Do you have any information? Oh my God, they didn't know what hit them. I had some poor intern faxing them, 5,000 pieces of paper. We broke through a fax machine that day and the next day. And I have heard that information that we all gathered to show we could win the Metro case was integral in making sure that commuter rail was part of the ADA. So you see this interplay. It's not just, let's get the statute. The statute without enforcement, doesn't work. It's not just the protests. Protests push people to thinking about it, but you need sometimes a little more impetus to get it done. And it's not just the lawsuits, because as Mike says, they can be lost. They were lost in 504 in New York and various other places. You have to think very creatively, and people have to work together. So, I've had a couple other cases against CTA. It's just sort of been my life's work, I think. 1995, I filed a lawsuit against the CTA, Bryant versus CTA, on behalf of an individual woman who could not get on her bus line because she used a support animal. Bus drivers routinely refused to allow her if she had the dog. If she didn't have the dog, she could get on. So I sat down with the CTA. It didn't take much convincing for them to get out their checkbook and change their policy. But I will say the interesting thing is we sat down at a conference, and of course the dog was there, and he was very quiet and very well behaved. But this dog was a giant pit bull. And he was very scary, and when people came in, they went up against the wall and around to get away from the dog. The dog was the sweetest dog I'd ever seen, and I said to the woman, Patricia Bryant, do you know what your dog looks like? Has anybody ever described him to you? No, he's just a real friendly dog. I said, Pat, he looks scary. Always scary.
That's hilarious.
And she said, well, maybe next time I'll get something a little more benign. But the CTA changed. I mean, remember, this is after the ADA, but they did not have the right policies in place to implement the ADA. So again, we had to, sit them down, settle that one easily. But the problems still remained. I would get calls from Renee or Mike or whatever saying, Kate, the lifts aren't working again. This isn't working. The driver just blew past us again. What's going on? And then working with Equip for Equality, on behalf of Access Living, we filed, I think this is my 4th transportation, maybe 5th transportation lawsuit, alleging that the CTA had the equipment on the buses and trains, but did not maintain the lifts or elevators. Stations were still inaccessible. Drivers did not deploy the lifts, did not call out the stops, and were inadequately trained.
What year was that, Kate?
That was in 2000.
Okay.
So you see, not 10 years after the ADA was passed, there were still these problems. And one key finding, as we were going through the 50,000, 100,000 pages of documents, was that while if a bus driver sped or hit a passenger or something like that, that was like serious. You got 3 of them and you were out. It was a serious problem, and the union had negotiated you can get 3 of these and then you could be fired.
Or something.
Pardon?
Like a ticket or something.
Like a ticket. It was called a ticket or something like that. But CTA staff failure to provide service to people with disabilities, deploy the lifts, announce the stops, or assist in any other ways was deemed a friendliness issue. This was not an offense that could lead to a dismissal. So you could get 20, 50, 100 complaints about friendliness, and that you were only counseled to stop being unfriendly. Could never lead to a dismissal. Never, never, never. What we got as a result of this particular lawsuit, and this again did not go to trial because they see the writing on the walls, it's really bad news. Bus, train, audio, visual displays. You know, this helps everybody. Nobody could ever hear. So, I love the visual ones myself because when it's loud or somebody next to me is playing their rap so loud I can't even hear myself think, I can still read it. Elevator rehabs and repair policies that included notifying people ahead of time that the elevator was out of business, out of order. Scrolling marquees on the L platforms, I think we're almost totally there. I mean, these things take time. Gap fillers on the trains so that if a person has a wheelchair, they could get onto the train because the Metro or CTA said they would never be able to make it even with the platform. Mike tells me, oh, they've done that, Kate. So 15 years later, it's been done in almost all stations, right?
Well, it's the train.
In the trains, right. Additional customer assistance for people with disabilities. And alternate transportation when necessary. When your elevator's out, you're supposed to be able to get alternate transportation provided by the CTA. Does that happen?
Not that I know of.
Not that. Call Equip for Equality should it ever happen. Station telephones with information for people with disabilities and TTY access. Has that happened? No. Not all? Okay. Okay. But this is probably the key thing. Staff performance standards based on ADA complaints used in annual performance evaluations of CTA staff. It's no longer a friendliness issue. You can be fired for failing to deploy the lift. They would do that. Not that the lift didn't work, but they just didn't want to do it.
Right.
Maps, signage, and brochures amended to include accessibility features, in which they always say in all of these, I get such a hoot, the CTA has decided to provide an independent monitor for a while, that's been done, and training. This is supposed to have been done. Equip has been looking at this and keeping tabs of this. But again, it shows that, that was 8 years later or 10 years after the ADA was passed. You're saying it's not all completely done. It is so much better, I think we can all agree about that, than it was, but there's still more to do. There's still compliance issues for all of these. There may be new issues. Technology changes. I mean, the phones on the platforms or in the stations, probably very few people use them anymore because you all have cell phones. Remember in 2000, people didn't have cell phones. What was?
They have to push that in that. Some people can't afford to buy.
Yeah, I know.
Cell phone, or the Wi-Fi doesn't work, or the internet's not a good connection, so you can't get an interpreter on your cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be able to know when the train's coming, or if there are transportation issues
Mm-hmm.
or holdups.
Mm-hmm. There's still work to be done. There's always work.
And if there's an emergency situation, what is somebody supposed to do? That should be a top priority. They
Well-
don't need to put it off any longer.
Yeah. And the CTA needs to know about that. They're not going to know about it unless somebody takes it to them, either by protest, by nice letters, by going to
ADA
the
committee.
committee, the ADA committee.
Yeah.
That needs to be done to let them know these are the things that need to be continued to be fixed. But technology is going to get beyond us very soon. I mean, it's probably already beyond me. But we need to see this as not a one thing and done, but a thing that continues to change and morph, and there may be new things very shortly. No one lawsuit can do it all. No one protest can do it all. No one statute can do it all. You still have to work. So constant vigilance is the key.
Thanks, Kate. So one of the things we've heard today is that we're gonna take questions later. I'm just gonna sum up a little bit. It was during this time that we all learned about educate, advocate, legislate. I mean, we try educating. Policymakers don't listen. We advocate. Policymakers don't listen. Then we legislate. So, Kate, I always remember you saying, "Remember, judges read newspapers."
Yes. Yes. Indeed, and indeed, we found out at Pat Patton's memorial service. Did you go to that? I know. Yes. I mean, Pat Patton was the judge for the first Jones case. She was an amazing human being, and it was a great loss when she died, because she was there and she pushed. And when there was a great line that she had in this hearing. They had purchased an expert, and this guy came in with his Rolex watch and his bespoke suit, and he looked just like, I am too great. And part of the thing he was trying to show is that it's too expensive to do this. And he said, anytime there are more than 5 standees on a bus, the CTA has to put another bus on that route. Pat Patton said, excuse me, I have a question. Who's the name of the person I call to get that happening, to get an extra bus on our route? I take the bus every day, and I stand every day with 20 to 25 people. I mean, he just looked like a fool. And indeed, I've talked to the counsel for the CTA since then, and he said, oh, we just sat there and we're dying, just dying. But I kept saying, we need information in the press. I talked to the press, Mike talked to the press, Renee talked to the press. I have clippings of things that we've done. Charlton, yeah, Charlton was the mole, because he was on the CTA board during this time. And he would talk to the press as a voice of the CTA and counter everything the CTA people were saying. And that was very important. And the judge did read that. We did hear that at the memorial service. She saw what was going on and how important it was to the community of people with disabilities in Chicago area that transportation be accessible, how utterly important And we picked our plaintiffs very carefully. I mean, Susan Nussbaum was a person who wanted to be able to go at the last minute to things because she was a playwright. She didn't know how long things were going to be going on, how long rehearsals were going to be going on. Tom Schwartz lost his job because he couldn't get consistent, adequate transportation. And he was a PhD in chemistry or something. Yeah, something like that. Had a great job at the UIC and lost it. And she really felt that. Tim Sullivan, who knows Tim Sullivan? Lots of people here? Yeah. We picked him because he said, I want to stay out till the bars close. And Kent Jones was someone who had, the fire in his belly and constantly worked on this. So, you pick your people, you make your protests. That influences courts. It does. They do read the papers.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to resume. We're going to go back into the Metro and Pace Suburban experiences, and then we're going to hear a little bit more from our panel and hear from you. All right, I think we're going to get resume our program today. My name again is Judy Panko-Reese, and I work here at Access Living, and I've been working with all the folks on this esteemed panel for the last 25 years and trying to get accessible transportation. I just wanted to say a few words about my experiences in the suburbs, working on PACE transportation and Metro transportation before the ADA. I was injured in 1980, so I didn't have the experiences of growing up with my disability. But shortly after I became disabled, I got married and had a baby. And when I needed to get my baby around, I was unable to get him on the buses because I was not able to physically navigate the buses, and I was unable to use the trains. So I called RIC. RIC immediately referred me to Access Living, where I met Jim Charlton for the first time. And Jim said to me, we've got a group of people meeting at Access Living who are living in the suburbs and having problems with the PACE buses and with the Metro trains. So I came down to Access Living, and it was my first experience really at the Independent Living Center. I had met Chris Matthews on the bus, but I mean, I didn't really have what I would say a soulful connection with the community yet. But I think it was when I got here and I met Sharon Lamp and Julie Walbear and a bunch of other people, and I can't remember everyone. I mean, there were so many people that were trying to get from the suburbs, either to work in the city or living in the city, trying to get work in the suburbs. And just basically, I had a 3-year-old son who I was trying to get to preschool, and the only transportation in the suburbs in the Evanston-Wilmette area that I could use was door-to-door service, but it would not allow me to take my baby to preschool because he did not have a disability. I had the disability. And my situation, by the way, at that time, and I think it was like 1987, 1988, was not uncommon, because when I worked at the Women's Center at RIC, I used to get complaints from mothers all over the country saying, I have a disability, my baby doesn't, they won't let me get my baby on, the disability transportation. Think of how different that is now, where nobody ever questions a mom or a dad coming on to either a paratransit vehicle or a mainline vehicle with their child. But that's, again, just to give you another small snapshot of how far we've come. The other thing I wanted to share with you is when we were working, trying to get, this was before Kate actually got us legally involved. Back in the organizing days when Julie Walbear, Sharon Lamp, myself, and several others would go down to the Metro board meetings, we would show up, pretty much asking for, at the time advocating for accessible transportation on the premise that we were taxpayers. And that was, for my life, that was the first experience that I was kind of referred to as you people, which was always an eye-opener. What do you people want? What are you people? So the big question they kept having for us was, and you'll love this, was why aren't there more of you people? Where is everybody? And we said, well, they can't get on the train, they can't get on the buses. Kind of like, well, there's not enough of you to justify putting all this money into our system. And all we kept saying is, people can't get around, don't you get it? It was just, you know, an amazing time. I mean, as Kate was saying, I mean, just, it was all circular reasoning, whatever they could muster to like somehow discourage us. And we just kept hanging in there. I was part of this group called the Concerned Rail Corridor Program. The Metro had pulled together some kind, this was when they were worried about getting sued. They pulled together this it was Rail Corridor Program. And Sharon and myself and Julie, we created this Concerned Rail Corridors. It was just, this was out of the Access Living Initiative. I mean, this is where I met these suburban users really here. And we, you know, we just really did as much advocating as we could, both with PACE and Metra. And then I met up with Kate, and I think you hooked us up with a private attorney too, who was working with you. Right. And I remember at that time being really worried about if I got engaged in a lawsuit that they were going to take services away from us. So many of us were worried about just some kind of punishment on the part of the few services we had. We were worried that if we became legally, you know, involved in the suits, that we would lose the little bit of service, because that had already happened to me at the time. Using a chair now, but at that time when I was a new mom, I was ambulatory, and they threw me off the rail corridor program because I wasn't using a chair at the time. And, you know, it's like weird. It just tells you how eligibility requirements keep going back and forth. Now they're throwing people off of services because they use chairs. So, I mean, it was very, very capricious. It was whatever they wanted to do. It was very random. There was never any logic to it. And I got involved. And so anyhow, at that point in time, I got involved with Kate, and Kate had, you know, kind of muscled up some other attorneys to work with those of us in the suburbs. And that was my introduction to disability rights, independent living. And again, several of us became members of the very first RTA ADA advisory board. You have to remember, the RTA wasn't really the big umbrella organizing all the disability and ADA stuff. I mean, that really came later. That evolved. You guys remember that. That's something we have today, but that did not exist in the 80s or early 90s. And so I was just going to leave it up to the panel to make any final comments before we open up to our great audience here.
I just want to talk about two other developments during the whole CTA time that were of note. One was the appointing of Jim Charlton to the CTA board. Many of you probably know Jim. If you don't know him formally, you've seen him zipping around here, usually on arts and culture nights. He's got a manual wheelchair. And at the time, Harold Washington, you all remember Harold, yes, our mayor from 1983, was elected in 83, and Jim was pretty instrumental in helping him get elected, organizing disabled folks for his campaign. So after Harold won, it was time to see what the disability agenda was. I remember Jim having a meeting with some of us and asking ADAPT people and saying, what are the things you want? First thing was, we want someone on the CTA board, and we want that person to be Jim Charlton. And Harold Washington appointed him. And once the whole council wars ended, and Jim actually got on the board, it was, I thought, the beginning of the end, because he was now one of the 7 people that we needed to vote for lifts on buses. So we at least had 1 vote, and we also had somebody on the inside who really played the inside well. He would tell us when there were things we needed to know that were going on. He would try to work them to tell them that, you know, if you don't do this, they're going to be really mad. And eventually we got the 4 votes with his help. The other thing that happened was the lawsuit decision came on Martin Luther King Day of 1988. It's significant because it was a judge at the Illinois Human Rights Department and on Martin Luther King Day, a holiday, that department is closed. But she had her staff come in on that day and issue that statement, issue that case, and that was not an accident. she waited probably until it was almost a year, more than a year after the trial, the decision came out. And at some point, I think she wanted to make this little point that this case should be, this decision in favor of ADAPT and the plaintiffs and Kate and the other lawyers worked on should come out on Martin Luther King Day. I remember the lawyers saying that when a decision comes out, the first thing you do is look at the last page and you see who won. And we heard it was going to come out, and I'm one of the lawyers I talked to on the phone, and I said, I read the last page, we won. And that was a great day.
Anything else, Kate, Renee?
You know, you had said the first time you were called "you people," what
Yeah.
do you people want?
Was it Metra? Yeah.
It was at Metra. My favorite line we got was, and it involved all of us, not just the plaintiffs. Jeffrey Ladd, who was, yeah, we all know this person. Everybody's going,
This person.
Was quoted in the press as calling us minor zealots, and I was asked, what do you think about that? And I said, I don't care about the zealot part, but I really think we're not minor.
I would just add that the first time I tried to get action from Metra, I don't remember who the chairperson of the board was, but I written a letter to my congressman, and the chairperson of Metra wrote to the congressman after he contacted him and said, Metra is not required to provide services to these people. They need to deal with their social workers. This is social workers. This is. I mean, it was in writing. It was amazing. I mean, I was just trying to give you all the type of mentality we were dealing with in the 1980s. It's just so far away from. Okay. Oh wait, Renee had one quick thing, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, one of the other things that was important was how much this influenced the ADA. Our experience here, as we were working towards the development of the ADA, especially on transportation, we always said transportation is the key to independence. Mm-hmm. And I think those that were in Washington, those that were framing the policy, and as Kate said, we were getting all those phone calls wanting to know what we did here. So it was monumental, the groundwork that was set, the grassroots activism that took place at that time really was an example of how disabled people can have collective power.
Right. And Mark Bristow, who couldn't be with us today, and Jim Charlton also played a very big role. So did many of you, and I know that some of the people in the audience here that I'm hoping will share their comments are Kelly Pierce, Kel, and then Raymond, and I also know Judy Shanley. So let's start off with Kelly.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, wait,
Just
we have one question.
curiosity,
We need a
many-
microphone, too.
Oh, sorry. How many people utilize lifts, the scrolling marquees, the announcements on a daily basis? Good. Just want to know. I know these guys do.
Okay, so we're going to start with Kelly. Any comments you want to make? Gary's going to bring a microphone. I know you wanted to share something
Thanks,
about.
Gary. I had a question for the panelists, and that is, the future probably will not be like the past in that there is like nothing and significant efforts and lawsuits and lots of efforts need to happen. I mean, we have lifts on buses now, stops have automatic equipment. It will likely be more, the actions and the challenges ahead will likely require more things that would require influence, negotiation, discussion, informing various parties, as compared to lawsuits over nothing. The question I have for the panel is, given that situation, how might people raise accessibility concerns in the future in a way that's constructive, engaging, informs people, and brings about access, considering that in many instances people may need to be nudged a little but not necessarily sued.
Well, that's where the street protesting comes in. When I say street, I don't necessarily mean street literally, but maybe I do. But, you know, it just begins with, how it began with ADAPT was just several people that shared the same frustration came together. And what they also shared was not wanting to just stew in the frustration, wanting to do something about it,
Right.
wanting to get together. And it was quite a powerful feeling to know that there were people around there that shared it. I remember the buses were big and green at the time. I still have what I call green bus nightmares, where I'm sitting on a street corner and a green bus pulls up. I go, what the hell? We still have these green buses? I can't believe it. And I wake up and realize it was just a nightmare. But I remember I would feel very frustrated when I'd see a bus, but I would feel better when I knew that we had an action coming.
Right.
Because I would say, that's all right, maybe I can't get there today, but you just wait till next week. I would feel much better knowing that there was some kind of action coming up. So I would say, you know, it comes back to the same thing, people that share the same frustration and a desire to do something about it, getting together and doing something, anything. You never know where it's going to go.
Kate?
Yeah, I would also recommend, Judy, you're on some ADA committee.
Right, yeah, I agree. The ADA committees, the RTA ADA committee, the PACE ADA committee, the Metro ADA committee, I'm on, I've attended the PACE ADA meetings. I know Garland and Heather are very involved in those. The Metro ADA, Jim Fernborg is here, Amy's here from the CTA. I will say that the committees are actually pretty good because staff does pay attention. The service is far from perfect. It's ever evolving, but I find that, you know, there is responsiveness. There is, you know, a response. I know, Raymond, you had your hand up.
Your question,
And just tell me your name.
Boy, great history, and just to think about where we've been and where we've gone. I'll just briefly share a comment about how I came to transportation advocacy, and then I want to ask a question. My comment, I live in DuPage County, and back in '92, we were actually kind of upset about ADA because we had 504 dial-a-ride all over the county. And then when ADA came in, PACE said, we're going to cut back to the minimum required by ADA. See, they viewed ADA as a ceiling, not a floor. And we said, oh, no, you're not. And I was sharing earlier with someone that I can still remember how I think we caused Gail Franzen to resign earlier from RTA. Anybody remember Gail Franzen, head of RTA?
Yes.
Well, he was running for DuPage County Board Chairman in 1994, and I think he resigned earlier from RTA than he wanted to because we were raising so much hell about transportation and the lack. Because they were saying to us at the time, well, we can't have public transportation here in DuPage. We don't want those kind of people coming out here. Well, long story short, we got them to continue ADA. Yeah, they did put for non-ADA, they did put a $5 fare on, and some of us were grandfathered, but then we got Ride DuPage, and that has really helped out. So it was interesting. My question is, transportation continues to evolve. I think two areas that still need a lot of work are taxi cab access here in the city of Chicago and in the burbs too, and these new services, Uber and Lyft and some of these. What are some strategies that we can use with some of these things going forward, particularly with something like Uber and that, where they say, well, these drivers are independent contractors. We can't control them and what they do as far as providing services. What would some of the panelists' thoughts be on how we, number one, make taxis more accessible, and number two, deal with some of the rideshare and other newer types of services?
I'm going to let the panel answer this. I will just say the Uber thing is a national concern. It's a very good question. If any of you are on Facebook, there are several of us that are tracking Uber in the press every day. New York, California, I mean, disabled folks, I don't know if ADAPT is involved with it yet, but it is an issue that is shared not just by those of us in Chicago, and it's being closely watched. The independent contractor thing is big. A lot of the problem with Uber, from what I understand, is they don't know if it's an app. They'll claim that it's not really transportation, it's just an app, you know, and whether this technology is like somehow exempting them from taking responsibility for us. So, and the taxi stuff, our leader, Mark Bristow, keeps a close eye on. So does Commissioner Karen Tamley. We're working very closely with the program. And any other comments from the panel on Uber, taxi? Okay, and we have a hand up here. This young woman here.
Yes. I'm Christy.
Say your name, please.
Oh, my name is Christy Tomaszewicz. And my question that I have is, when did they start doing the reduced fare and rides free, the disability rides free on the buses and the trains?
I think some of the reduced fare was part of the ADA settlement. I think so. Don't you think? You don't think so?
For a long time.
You don't think so?
It was totally independent of it.
Blagojevich had some of the free ride
He did it
stuff.
because he wanted to,
But I thought,
5 votes in a sense.
That was for free rides.
okay, but what about reduced fare? Anybody in the room know the answer to the reduced fare question?
Here, I'll bring a mic.
I just think it's always been that way.
Thank you. Rosemary Gertie from the RTA. Reduced fares have been required for decades. That was part of the so-called UMTA, Urban Mass Transportation Act, back in the 60s or 70s. So the half-fare program for seniors and people with disabilities has been around for decades. As you mentioned, the ride-free programs came about in 2008, I want to say, with the governor at that time.
And who's speaking? I just wanted to.
Rosemary Gertie. I'm with the
Hi,
Regional
Rosemary.
Transportation Authority.
Great, thanks, welcome. Thank you. And we have a gentleman right here.
Okay.
And say your name.
My name is Jamal Powell, and I must say that was some fascinating history listening to all of the panelists. Unfortunately, I came in late, but with that being said, I do have a question as it pertains to the city of Chicago. Now, it was stated that Jim Charlton was appointed by Harold Washington. And it was also stated the fact that there are still a lot of problems with the CTA well into the 90s. Now, do you think, had the late Mayor Washington lived and let's say would have been elected for a couple more terms, would there have even been a need for some of the lawsuits that happened to the CTA in the 90s?
Good question. You guys answer it. It's Kate and Mike.
I remember when we got the first. Lyft buses, and there was 92, and there was a ceremony outside City Hall where they cut a ribbon. The buses were already on the street, but it was just sort of a photo op type of celebration. And at that meeting, Mayor Daley said, if I had been mayor during all this, this wouldn't have been an issue. Whether he meant it or not, I don't know, but he may have meant it, who knows. Harold Washington did appoint Jim Charlton, but he did also appoint people around him that were a problem. There was a man named Robert Passwell who was the director. He wasn't on the board, but he was the president or CEO or something, and he was quite an obstructionist. And Jim had to tangle with him too. Harold did appoint people also who initially did not support us, but they were the first ones to come around. And when we finally did get 6 votes out of 7, his people were the first to come around. So I don't know. Harold did do that, but he also himself needed some educating too.
Thank you. We have Donna Shaw. Renee and then Donna Shaw. Okay.
Okay, I think something that's important there is the cultural shift that's occurred over the past 25 years has been tremendous in terms of people being integrated with disabilities. But I think that the fact that we have the law and we've had legislation and all the enforcement efforts, you know, that we in the disability community are more active, can potentially be more organized, and we're certainly more visible. So it's harder to really resist a movement of people. We see backlash occurring every once in a while, and there's still many barriers and people who throw up opposition. But now we're not at the stages where we were 30, 35 years ago, just trying to validate ourselves anymore. We've already gone beyond that. We've taken positive steps. So it's hard to say politically, you know, where we'd be, but you know, we still feel in this kind of economic times, and with the changes that we've seen electorally, we still see resistance based on the fact that people think we're a burden. And that's, I think, the fight that we have to continue to make people aware that our gains are the gains for everyone in society, not just people with disabilities, because we all get older, we acquire disabilities, we have children born with disabilities. It helps everybody. So it's not just about disability rights, it's human rights.
It's, yeah, a lot of people are aging into disability with baby boomers. There's going to probably be more people living with disabilities ever. And it's just an ongoing thing. Donna Shaw, you had a question?
Yes, I did. So my name is Donna K. Shaw, and I am a member here at Access Living in a couple of different groups. I'm a member of the deaf community, and I had a question with regard to transit. The folks who work at the CTA station. So, for example, if I get off on the wrong stop and I go up to the CTA station and try to speak to somebody through the glass, one of the problems there is that there is no communication, and so I have to show my address, and I always encounter a bit of an attitude, and I kind of accept it, the facial expressions they make, and I try to, bring it down to their level and point and say, where do I go, here. So I'm wondering, with regard to the board, have they trained folks at the CTA stations so that they can help people with different disabilities, specifically deaf, with directions or things like that? Another problem with regard to the metro trains, they have no, they don't have any people on the upper platforms to show, which train I'm supposed to take, and I always have to wait at the end of the platform and wait and figure out which train is going, and then run over to a train and ask a person, which train do I take? And I have to be in a really big hurry to catch that person and make sure that I don't miss the train before it takes off. So I have to, hold my piece of paper up, take it up to a person, but there's no signage, no marquees or anything that can direct me. And then thirdly, with all of the transit, whether it's bus or metro, they make announcements over the intercom systems, and I'm pretty clueless. And then all of a sudden, a train or a bus has passed me by, and I have to, I have to go through several different doors to go inside and figure out what's happened, and it's really a waste of time for me, and it's super frustrating. And they really need to train the people at the stations so that folks like me can have equal access and not be so frustrated. I used to drive, but I stopped driving a long time ago, and I started using transit because of traffic. And so those are my questions I have for the panel.
I don't know if the panel's going to have answers. I do know that we have representatives in the room from the CTA and Metro. There's a hand up, Amy Serpy. Yes. Just 1 minute, we got to get you a microphone.
Oh, here's a mic. I don't even know that I
Say
need
your name
one.
and your title, please.
Sure. Amy Serpy. I'm the manager of ADA compliance programs for CTA. I will say, number one, all CSAs, our customer service assistants, the new people at each station do receive training. I do the training. And trust me, I go through all of the different scenarios. I talk about etiquette. I talk about appropriate language. We talk about appropriate procedures. They get and not just through me, they also get a very intensive training. It's like a 2-week training where they, learn how to use the gap filler appropriately, and they learn different things, how to appropriately accommodate people with disabilities. Are they perfect? No. And I will admit that. They're people. And what I will say, though, is people who have disabilities, if you're experiencing problems, you need to advocate, and you need to contact us. If you provide very specific information, I was at X station at this time on this day and this occurred, we do follow up. I write emails all the time to people that are the managers of those people. There is disciplinary action taken, and I know people are sometimes frustrated. They want to know, well, what happened to that person? We can't tell you because of legal issues. I'm sure Kate is pretty aware of that. There are things that we're not allowed to disclose in terms of a person's personnel file. But I will say emphatically that those complaints are taken very seriously. I get calls. I have offered people can call me. My number's on our website. I've given my number out publicly if people want it. It's 312-681-2608. People know me within the community. So if you have specific issues, we need to know that. And Donna, I know that, we've talked about things, and I know we also have people who are deaf and hard of hearing involved on our ADA committee. I've worked really hard to try and make that committee diverse in ethnicity, diverse in disability, so that we do get feedback from other people. So we're not perfect. We're working at it, and if you have specific things that happen, let me know, because I do change our trainings as things evolve. So if there's not enough for the deaf and hard of hearing community, we are looking at other options in terms of technology as well. We just, things don't always move as quickly as I would even like them.
Thank you, Amy. We're going to ask Jim Fernenborg for a response, and then we're going to move on to Judy. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
And Jim, if you could give your name and title, please.
Yes, indeed. This is Jim Fernenborg. I'm the Accessibility Project Manager for Metra. If you're speaking in terms of our downtown terminals and trying to find out which train you have to access, we have 5 downtown terminals. We have ample numbers of departures monitors that are visual as well as audio. And when you get out into the actual train departure areas, be it the train shed at the Ogilvy Transportation Center or the 2 concourses that make up the entirety of Union Station, or you're at LaSalle Street, or at Millennium Station or Van Buren, at every trackhead, or if you want to call it the bumping post, we have signs that will indicate what train is going out, what time it's departing, and all the stops that is making. Now, if you need some assistance with that, I'd be delighted to meet you at one of the downtown terminals and show you all of those features.
Jim, you want to give your number? It's Kate Yannius.
Sure. My direct number is 312-322-6766. And I take virtually all the complaints.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
Lucky me.
Thank you, Ed. And we can get that information for people afterwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Pardon me?
How can we get that word out to the whole?
Yeah, we need to get the word out to the entire deaf community is what Renee is suggesting, and we can work on that with you, Jim and Donna. Judy, are you still in the room? Judy Shanley from Easter Seal. Maybe you can identify yourself and tell us what you want to share with us in way of resources and experiences.
Sure. Hi, I'm Judy Shanley, and I'm with the National Office of Easter Seals, which is here at the Sears Tower. We've got our national office here and then also in Washington, D.C., and I oversee education and transportation projects at Easter Seals. And I wanted to tell you about 2 national resources that happen to be in your own backyard, and hoping you'll take advantage of those resources. The first is a center, and I left some brochures at the table, called the National Center for Mobility Management. How many of you have heard of NCMM? No one. Oh, well, I hope you all, leave this meeting and are excited about accessing our free resources. Our project works on building coordinated systems so that people can have spontaneous lives, people with disabilities, older adults. We work with Ubers, we work with Lyfts, we work with sidewalks and integrating transportation options so that there's a continuum of service for people. We have training, we have products, we have webinars, we have lots of national technical assistance. We're funded by the Federal Transit Administration. The second project I wanted to tell you about is, how many of you have heard of Project Action? Yay! Accessible community transportation in our nation. We were funded for about 28 years. We were an earmark in the federal legislation, and that funding went away, but we recently competed for a new national center, and Easter Seals, along with N4A, which is an organization for older adults, were successful. So we're going to be starting up a new National Technical Assistance Center to support the Americans with Disabilities Act, and look for materials in October. But we're right in your own backyard because we're in Chicago as our national office. So I hope you take advantage
And
of
Judy,
us.
just to echo off of Donna Shaw's concerns, are you working with the concerns of people who are deaf, hard of hearing, visually impaired, and blind as well?
Sure. All people, the diverse range of people with disabilities. We support the Americans with Disabilities Act, and in terms of the coordination work we do with the National Center for Mobility Management, we're assuring that all modes of transportation are connected so that there's seamless travel. So yes, we work with all populations.
Any last questions here as we wrap up?
The National Center for Mobility Management builds kind of coordinated infrastructures and a process for bringing together trains and buses and walkways and taxis, and looks at programs like shared ride vehicles and one call, one click. The other program, the other center, it's going to be starting up, but it's a continuation of the Americans with Project Action, and really focuses on the ADA, and we do focus on accessible training for drivers, understanding your rights in terms of what the ADA supports. I am not, because the program is new, the center is new, I think there might be a slightly new focus on it, but the materials, both programs and materials, are free, available on our website, and we are national technical assistance providers, so that's what's similar between the two projects.
Judy's materials are out on the table, and I'm sure she'll be around. Heather, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was great. And one thing, I've been riding paratransit public transit all my life. And one thing I noticed, like from the difference between then and now, is one thing is that most of the train stations are wheelchair accessible. Like my Metro line is fully accessible. And another thing is that with like PACE, I normally take PACE, but sometimes I'll take CTA. But PACE is like fully accessible, but even then they always helped out people if you had any questions. And they would lower the stair, but they didn't always have lifts, but they had buses that lowered or kneeled.
I don't think the kneeling buses came into existence till after our actions. Is that correct?
They were not in existence until
Yeah, so, I mean, it's nice that you're able to use those, Heather, but just in the spirit of our panel here, talking about what we've accomplished, in addition to lifts, we did get kneeling buses and lowering buses, which did not exist before our efforts. I think Jamal, and then, how many other hands? Okay.
There's a lady behind him.
Hey.
She's
Okay.
had her hand up for a while.
Okay. All right, so there's a lady here. Wait, Jamal, we're going to get this lady a turn first.
Hi, it's Carol Murphy, and I ride Pace a lot. My question is, what is the maximum length of time that they can keep us on the bus when we're going to our destination?
There's, the way I remember this is it shouldn't be any longer than, are you talking about a Pace paratransit ride?
Uh-huh.
Okay, the Pace paratransit ride is supposed to not exceed what it would take on a mainline bus. In other words, if it's going to take you 20 minutes to get from Access Living to the metro station, the paratransit ride ideally shouldn't take you any longer than 20 minutes. So with that said, that's my understanding. I don't know if Rosemary or,
Raquel keeps it, but she left and she gave me this card.
okay. So I don't know if Amy has any thoughts about that regarding ADA.
Because I was booked a ride for this meeting today, and I told them the time I wanted to get here. They said that it would take like 2 hours.
Oh.
So I'm like,
And where
really?
the question would be, how long would it take you from where you live to use mainline?
See, I'm in Skokie, and I wanted to come down to the meeting, and I was booking a ride, and I said, I need to be there by 10. They wanted to give me like a 7:30 pickup.
Old days.
I think that's just utterly ridiculous, though.
Traffic and everything.
2 hours?
Yeah, I would suggest that, where do you live?
Skokie.
Okay, so I would suggest that you call the Pace complaint line. If you have that number, if you don't have it, we can give it to you, and ask them tell them the date and the exact locations, and what was told to you, what your carrier is, and then ask them in the future, what's reasonable for you to get, from your location to this destination.
One more quick question.
Pardon me? Oh, wait, okay, tell me who.
One more.
No.
Ray can respond also.
I can also
Okay,
respond.
so wait a minute, we've got several hands up.
Can Ray respond to that last
Okay,
question?
Ray wants to respond.
What I would suggest
And
you
then
do,
Carol
too,
has
as
a
chair of the Suburban ADA Committee, and what we've been told by PACE staff is that what people should do is either call the RTA at 836-7000, or if you are web able, go on the web at www.rtachicago.org, I think it is, and you put in the trip from your home to here and see how long it takes. It's supposed to take per the RTA trip planner, and that should give you an idea of how long you should be on the bus. And if you're on the paratransit longer than that, then yes, you should complain.
And then Carol, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, these add-ons, they just make the ride even longer, like the last-minute add-ons and stuff. Is there any limit to that? I mean...
Right, there isn't. It's really what Ray just suggested is the standard, and so it really depends whether the amount of time that you were on the bus from beginning to end was the same or more than what it would have taken you had you taken mainline public transportation. But we can get you information about where to follow up on that. Any other hands on that subject? Am I missing? I'm blind on my left side, so help me out here.
Well, there's
So we got,
right there.
we have Jamal. Okay, Jamal, I think you're next.
Okay. Now,
Okay.
one thing that, as listening to the here and now from the panel, one thing that I think everybody in the room should remember is any advances in transportation and stuff we want depends on adequate transportation funding. And if we don't push for Congress as well as our friends in Springfield to adequately fund public transportation, we could ask for advocate for whatever we want, but if there's no money for public transportation, then there's no way we can get what we want either.
Here, here. I think we all agree with you on that one, Jamal. And I think there's a lady right here.
Okay.
Right behind Kelly. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Yeah, I think.
Could you say your name and
yes, my name is Margaret O'Hara, and I just know that we touched briefly on the thing about taxi cabs, and I know that things have changed now to where there's a central number to call for handicapped accessible, but has anyone had any problem? It seems like it's you can't necessarily plan ahead, you can't order anything. It's almost like going out and waving on the corner and getting a taxi, and I thought by centralizing it was going to be a little better. And does anyone know of any kind of resource that could be contacted to work on that issue?
As I said, I know that Marka Bristow, our CEO, has been working with it. I don't think she's a resource. She's been working on the advocacy and to improve it. Commissioner Karen Tamley at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, you might want to call her office and ask her for either suggestions or resources.
Isn't there also a City of Chicago consumer,
For the taxi?
Yeah.
The problem here is this is a systemic issue. In other words, it's not like one complaint against one cab driver. There is a system now in place, and they increased the number of accessible taxis, and it's still almost impossible to get one.
I was going to say the open taxi system. I've heard a lot of, I know people who've gotten taxis easily built under that system.
Okay, maybe you could share some of their tips with I'm sorry, your name again was? Margaret. Margaret, behind you. She's sitting right behind you. Maybe you can talk.
Let Kelly.
I'm getting a taxi at the airport. Actually, they don't even take. Actually, they don't even take reservations if someone wants a taxi at an airport, a wheelchair accessible taxi, that is, because there will be a wheelchair accessible taxi generally within 5 minutes. So that's my experience, and I've arranged several taxis for people at Midway and they've been able to get their taxis without hassle.
But it's getting to Midway that's the problem.
Well, I was just giving that as an example, but open taxis also can schedule pickups and so forth.
Is that an app?
It's a number.
It's a program by the City of Chicago where what they've done is that they dispatch the taxis from all the different taxi associations that are wheelchair accessible. So they dispatch, there's one central dispatch service for all the wheelchair accessible taxis.
That's who I'm complaining about.
Right.
The open taxi. So
right.
Where do you live? Where do you live?
Where you live? Where do you live?
Lincoln Park.
Okay.
Okay, because I have a little trouble, but I live near downtown, and that's just the case in general. Now, if I live way out west or way south or something, I would have a lot of trouble.
So I'm right in the city.
But yeah, it's like everything else if you're central city. But that's I have a feeling that issue is gonna take some adapt style organizing at some point, because
yeah, I agree.
The people that can control that are the mayor and people like that. And the idea with adapt was direct action. Who is the person that can make the change? And that's where you take your complaint. And the people that can make the change in those days were the CTA board. There are a lot of peripheral people to which we could file complaints and join committees and things like that, but the people that can make the change are the CTA board. And it's probably going to take several people confronting people directly, like the mayor, saying you need to change this. And it's amazing how things change when you do that. All of a sudden, the things they could never do, suddenly they're able to do.
Margaret, I would still encourage you to contact Commissioner Tamley's office, because she really oversees that program, and see if she's got any suggestions. Okay, we've got our final wrap up here. Any final comments or questions for the panel? Garland?
All right, thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I just want you to know, like, what you're saying is really what you call contacting them at Midway is really insane, because it's going it's like what Mike says, have to contact them, and then you have to call them way in advance to make sure that if that person has crutches or a walker or a cane to go like to the airports, and like Kelly said too, so you have to call them way in advance for that. And then also too, like, especially when we had this fight for 25 years, and I think it's really showed us that we still got to get that big goal so we can accomplish it, so we will never be back down. And this is definitely the tip of the iceberg, but we want to go all the way up to the mountaintop of it and to make sure that we have finally succeeded, and we will never, ever gonna be down and out, because we're all in this together. We're ADA all in one, and that's the goal of it.
All right, nicely said, Garland. That's a great line to end this wonderful. I want to thank Kate and Mike and Renee and Access Living for putting this together. So thank you very much. This concludes our